Hello and welcome back to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Tom Castley, the VP of Sales for Outreach. Tom, welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Tell me, could you give the listeners a quick 90-second introduction to who you are, who you serve, and how you got to where you are?
Wow. Okay, so been in sales pretty much all of my career, although I came from tech support to pre-sales into sales. And for the last 10 or 11 years, I guess my sweet spot has been helping US companies launch into Europe.
Excellent. Okay. So, Tom, tell me, what are the four most common questions that you're asked about growing companies fast in Europe?
Number one is, how do you keep picking companies that do well and have an exit? So I'd like to say I had a formula for that. And if I did, I'm not sure I would share it. But yeah, I mean, number one is, how do you pick a winner? And yeah, for me, just look at the fashionable metrics at the time. Is it two things? Does it work? Number one. And can it be protected, I suppose, at the highest possible level? In other words, what's the barriers to entry for the competitors? It's either, protected by patent or protected by complexity or IPR. So that would be first and foremost in terms of picking. Second would be, and I've made these mistakes, I felt the pain myself, it's just not for 1 minute hiring anybody who you wouldn't take into the following year. There was a previous leader of mine in my, Colin Rowland in my previous company, said to us once halfway through the year, is there anybody on your team who you don't want with you next year? Because they shouldn't be with you now. So that was after the fact. And it's kind of carried me on thinking, right, when I hire this person, am I hiring them to fix a problem today and then they become a problem in the future? Or is this somebody who can just keep growing in their roles? And
there is a rule: better no breath than bad breath.
Yeah.
Never compromise on recruitment. It's the single highest hidden cost in any business. And it's a false economy to take someone on just because you need to fill a seat. One of my clients, Jim Harvey, came up with a beautiful line when we were talking about dealing with a particularly difficult salesperson on his team. And the question he was asking himself is he better than an empty chair?
Yeah, it is. So somebody that one is there a disease? They can they pull everybody else down. They can have everybody else lower their standards. Two is it takes time to find good people, and then you've got to was it 9.6 months to first sale is the average in SaaS, and 13.4 months is the average to full quota bearing rep. Wow. So, and then you've got to think about all the pipeline they screw up, all the customers who won't talk to you again. The costs are hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't care what your average selling price is.
That produced a calculator on the true cost of a bad hire in enterprise.
Right.
And it's somewhere between 35 and 125 times salary when you take into account lifetime customer value, referrals, upsells, cross-sells, marketing leads burnt through, the frustration, the amount of management time, recruitment costs, onboarding costs, training costs. It's astronomical. Frankly, you would be better taking your money, putting petrol on it and setting it alight, because at least you'd be warm.
Yeah, and the other angle for me as well is if you've hired somebody bad, then you've probably hired too quickly as well. In startups, 65% of reps don't make their number. There's a 35% turnover of staff, therefore, within a year, which just isn't great for the sales community and for an area that I'm particularly passionate about, improving the professionalism and the respect that we get in this arena. So then you say, right, well, don't hire them. Now my existing reps have got more pipeline, more opportunity to go after. Isn't it better to have some reps smashing their number, being retained, building experience, and just waiting? I can understand in a massive software company, if you're 5% down in heads and that equals 100 people, then even a stop clock is right twice a day, and you can kind of hide mediocrity in the numbers. But in that small startup environment, it doesn't make sense.
There are a couple of rules that we apply here, which is hire slow and fire fast. And the other one is always be recruiting. One of the most important duties, I think the primary responsibility of any manager is to constantly be building the bench, whether you have vacancies or not. And in the event that you come across a superstar, hire them. They're going to make the number, they'll pay for themselves. But do not hire reactively, because that invariably means that you compromise on recruitment. And the other rule there is never compromise on recruitment. So I'm with you 100%. And sales should be a force for good, but it's not, largely because of leadership lacking a really good understanding of how to run and build a great sales operation.
More important than ever as we come out these crazy times we're going through at the moment. The world has changed. Business will need to change. Change is often ignited by buying something, and who's the person who's going to facilitate that? That's sales reps. It's not going to be self-service. The other angle I've got on always be hiring is, of course, at Outreach, we're a tool for salespeople. One of the best ways of doing like deep discovery on what the situation is like at candidate companies is to interview the candidates and just say, so what's it like selling in your company? What systems have you got? They'll tell me everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
That information gets locked and loaded and passed straight off to the business development team to then be, without obviously portraying anybody's any confidentiality, but it's just super good discovery.
Absolutely. I mean, recruitment is a fabulous way of getting competitor intelligence as well. If you are a savvy manager, you'll want to know who the best salespeople are in your competition. You want to know what is coming down the pipe in terms of shifts in their strategy. And, you have an obligation to feed that information to your sales team. It's crazy not to. So what's the other question that people ask you a lot?
The other question is, how do you know when to lean in, and how do you know when to kind of hold back? What are the ratios? There's always these questions about, how many SDRs do you hire to AEs, and when do you hire the next one, and so on. And look, I'm a huge fan of meritocracy. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of high potential, experience low. And, when I look at some of the SDRs I hired in previous roles who are now VPs of sales, these people don't take as long to get into very serious positions and leadership positions as we used to back in the day. So number one is, in terms of knowing when to hire, you've got to know your numbers. You've got to know, what is my pipeline, my net pipeline generation? Not my gross pipeline, because your marketing stuff lost all the time. What's the rate of that? How much do I need to carry a sales rep? And then I need to factor in, how long does it take me to hire somebody? How long does it take me to ramp somebody? And you're kind of working out the lead time in two different areas at the same time. But it's our responsibility to know that. And if you don't know it, you're going to hire people at the wrong time. The second thing I would say, here at Outreach, we have 2 SDRs to 1 AE at the moment. We won't have that forever. Yeah. But when you're starting from scratch, those people are going to, I need a glut of talent to be coming into the business in a year and a half's time. And at Outreach, SDRs make great emerging reps. They make great customer success people. And rather than having the difficulty of finding and taking the risk of taking a punt on externals, I'd rather be promoting these people internally. And so, so it's knowing when to hire and when to lean in is the third question.
Again, fabulous. So again, one of the things that I teach my clients is that you need to plan your business for the business you're going to become. And you need to plan the positions that you need 18 months, 2-3 years ahead. And you also need to set budgets aside and identify what the triggers are. So when you hit a milestone, you know that you need to start that recruitment process. You've already got people on the bench. And if you've got people on the bench, then it takes you a month to recruit instead of 15 weeks. That's a quarter of lost revenue, the ramp-up time. And if you aren't doing that, I think that's crazy. And I think your point about building talent from within is really important as well. So recruit people who have the ambition to evolve and develop a career path and coach them into those roles. So it sounds like what you're actually giving them is a 12 to 18 month ramp up period to learn how to become the next position. Is that what you're doing?
Absolutely. We have certain quality and tenure barriers. So, for example, for an SDR to become an AE, they have to have been an SDR for a year, and they have to have done 100 sales as a minimum. And it's rare that somebody's done 100 in 12 months. Superstars do. Some of them get it done in 8 months, but then they just haven't had enough time in the seat to have learned the other things that are going to support them. Right. And Bridge will tell you, they did some analysis. SDRs that get promoted into sales in 9 months have a 68% failure rate. SDRs that get promoted in 15 months have a 12% failure rate. It's just tenure. It's just that basic training so that, they've got the skills to be able to carry them as they go into that closing role.
Slow down to speed up. Like a plant. If you grow it inside and it's not beaten by the weather, then it's frail. And you need the scar tissue. So slow down to speed up, and don't try and push people into positions too fast. And I think one of the really important things is learning constraint. Holding back and constraining what someone can do makes them far more creative. I did a short stint of stand-up comedy. It wasn't very good, but I came home one day having not made it to through the audition. My youngest daughter said, "Daddy, people ask me if you want to be like your dad." And I say, "No." I said, "What do you mean?" It says, "Well, I'm funny." So I wasn't best pleased. She's definitely got the funny gene.
Yeah, that's
when I was writing the jokes, the best lesson I learned was just take out as much as you can, leave the bare bones. And I was putting together a plan, and my coach said to me at the end, I was so proud of my plan. And my coach said to me, "So if you could only keep 50%, which 50% would you keep?" I was completely crestfallen, but he was so right. We need to learn constraint. We need to learn to hold back. So what are the 3 most uncommonly asked questions that people should ask but don't?
What should they ask? Well, actually, to your point, coaching is this idea. A lot of SDRs are literally just sent, off you go. You need to make more calls. So it's one is, how do you coach? What's your structure? They don't ever ask about that. 2 is, I'm slightly sport. I'm in the Revenue Collective, which is a global movement of CROs and VPs of sales. And in London, we've got about 200 in the group. And so I'm actually surrounded by people who are just passionate practitioners. So they do actually ask all the questions. But if I think of people outside of that, the other one that they don't ask, related to coaching as well, is they keep looking at outcomes or outputs, not inputs. And the question I'll never ask is, what are the things that you measure that get growth? And it's not pipeline generated. It's not deals closed. There's so many variables that you can't control in that. What I'd rather control is frequencies of things that they should be doing. So how many conversations are you having with decision makers? How many face-to-face meetings are you having? How many telephone calls are you doing? How many, whatever this, those inputs are that make a difference. And then looking at their competencies. So from a Sandler standpoint, it would be, how many times are you getting to 3rd level paying? How good are you at upfront contracts and driving the outcome to the next meeting? How good are you avoiding someday, maybe, never, send me some more information? Those are competencies which we're looking to develop, those kind of accountability pieces. They never ask about that.
Excellent. What sort of tools are you using as a manager in order to help you coach more effectively?
Without it sounding like a sales call all of a sudden. So outreach is particularly good at giving me visibility on frequencies because it's tracking and monitoring everything. And so reps can see how are they pacing compared to their peers. And then I'm very fortunate at outreach, and actually a lot of other companies are now experiencing this with Zoom, being able to record these calls, whether you're using Jiminy is a great local vendor here in the UK. You've got Chorus and Gong. I'm sure there's a few Refract, a few other players. When you're recording calls and transcribing them, I now have the opportunity to sit down with one of my reps and dissect the call in the cold light of day. And, we're all perfect in hindsight. But, working through a call and saying, right, let's look at, coach to the process. How did you open it? Did you have the upfront contract? Was the timing agreed, the agenda and the outcome and the next steps? Brilliant. Next part of the call. Did we drive to decisions? Next part of the call. Were you open or closed questions here? Did you spot all of the potentials that you've got? And the beauty of that technology that's now pervasively available, I'm finding the top reps are reviewing every single, they're not making notes in a notebook anymore. They're not being distracted. They're having the call. They're living the moment. They're in the room. As I forget who the inspirational speaker was. He said, if you're going to be in the room, be in the bloody room. Just be there. And then, they're listening back to the call afterwards and then making their notes.
Well, this is really interesting. So many salespeople waste opportunities because they don't prepare.
Yeah.
They wing it. They don't have a system. And then they don't debrief. It's critical. If any of you are listening and you are not doing this stuff, pre-call planning is essential. You need to think through what you want to have happen by the end, the kind of questions that you are going to be asked, the questions you need to ask, the answers you need to get back, clear next steps. You need to understand how they're going to object and what you're going to do when they do object or control the conversation. You need to rehearse. Now, this sounds like overkill, but certainly for large, complex, valuable sales, if you are not putting in 3 hours of rehearsal for every hour you're going to be in front of the prospect, I think you're wasting masses of opportunities. And then once you've executed the sale, come out and do a written post-call debrief and then have someone else debrief it with you so that they can help you pick up on questions that you should have asked that you didn't, stuff that you learned, stuff that you missed because you didn't hear what was being said at the time because you were listening with happy ears. And if you don't do that,
follow it up and triangulate it. No gospel according to one. And I take your point on the preparation. Lots of people go into a meeting without even bearing in mind, we sell the same stuff day in and day out. We should be able to say not just what the next step is, what the double next is, what the triple next is. Why not tell the customer that as part of, if this meeting goes well, typically the next step is this, and the decision we make together at the end is whether we do that. By the way, thinking glass half full, if that next meeting goes well, either what do you think we should be doing if it's a very repeatable process that the buyer's been through previously, but if we're educating them, then say typically the next step after that is this. How we don't signpost people. People wonder why they've got long sales cycles.
Yeah.
It's because they haven't even given the customer the map to find out how to get to Ben Nevis from where they live.
And again, prospects are never afraid of you if you tell them what you're going to do to them. One of the reasons why the upfront contract is so blissfully useful is because there are no surprises.
Yeah.
You tell them upfront exactly what's going to happen by the end. You agree that together, and then there's no mutual mystification. There's no surprises, and there's certainly no mind reading. So again, you've touched on some points that I'm quite passionate about, as you can tell. So tell me this. When you are coaching your people, how frequently are you coaching, and what's that cadence typically look like?
So not enough. And even if I have a good week of coaching, I can still tell you it's not enough. The top sales leaders in the world will spend, and this is direct, not VPs, but, first line managers should be spending 50% of their time in coaching. And when I say coaching as well, that's not, I'm quite a fan of the old fashioned situational leadership, S1 through to S4.
Right.
S1 is go away, do that, come back when you've done it. S2, which is where a lot of first line sales managers live, is let me show you how I would do it, which basically creates dumb robots. And, I was the laziest salesperson you ever met. I had a sales manager who did that for me. Rather than wasting any brain cells on anything, I'd just go and ask them. They were a superb salesperson in the day, and they just gave me a great answer, and I'd go with it or dismiss it. but it was super easy to do, but they ran out of time, effort, and resource. S3, which is where we should live, is let me help you to do it your way. Really difficult for a first-line sales manager because now I can't give them the answer. But if you do that, guess what? You actually build people who can take your job.
Absolutely. Work towards redundancy. And
yeah. S4 is kind of pretty much autonomy. Go away, do that, and come back when you're done. Come back at the end of the year when you're 300% of your number. In sales, my most seasoned, most capable sales rep, they only, the furthest they ever went round that kind of box is they had 1 foot, maybe 1.5 feet in box 4. They just had their little toe still in box 3. They wanted to know that the door was open to have a conversation if they were having a crisis of confidence or they wanted to kind of talk things through or brainstorm it. But no rep ever lived in S4.
This then raises another really important question. I've often heard people say, oh, we hire veterans. We don't need training. They don't need coaching. Yeah. Can you just do me a favor and dispel that myth?
In the world of SaaS, I'm not sure there is a veteran anymore. The SaaS industry, as it's gone, if you think about how, for me, and I'm from a software selling background, so we had on-premise sales where the idea was to take, if you took support maintenance out of the equation, 90% of the customer value out of that first contract, you wanted to sign them up for as much as you could and then run for the hills. And so there were people, we did that forever. So you could find people who just knew how to structure those contracts. And when they're big, it's political, you needed relationship building skills, you needed people skills, a different set of skills. SaaS came along and still pretty much every SaaS company, whilst they were doing annual contracts, they still tried to take down 70 or 80% of the lifetime value or the potential in a customer. Forget the renewals because then they weren't looking at a land and expand model. And that used very similar skills. What I'm now seeing from millennial salespeople who are coming in and if you look at the fastest growing software companies in the world, they, on average, take down 6% of the lifetime value of a customer in the first transaction. So I don't need relationship building skills anymore. I need people who can build value, urgency, understand the process, can repeat it, and run amok in that direction. So I need people who are exploitative in their approach to selling. So in other words, they can exploit a process. And I need a few explorers, I'll maybe unpack this a little bit later in the webinar, who are looking at kind of new ways of communicating that. So given that, actually tenure is, and the people who have done this before actually don't bring me anything.
Very interesting. Let's talk about failure and the importance of it. How crucial is it that you let your reps fail?
Yeah, it's an area of development I have at the moment for myself. When I did one of these profiling tools a few months back, one of the things that came out is I need to be more willing to let my reps fail. And the thing is, when you're growing a business, there's two things you can do. You can either just generate more pipeline and have the same win rate, or you can increase your win rate. Yeah. And part of increasing the win rate is disqualifying early, so that you're you're not. I remember once I went through to a boss and I said, I'm smashing it compared to, I had a 30% win rate. Everybody else was like on 15%. Yeah. Said, so there's 200 selling days in the year, Tom. What you're telling me is for 140 of those, you're still paying our competitor's mortgage. Why don't you come back into this office when at least the majority of the year you're working for me? I was like, and it always stuck with me. I was like, wow, that really hurts. Yeah, literally 140 days a year. I'm because when I don't win, when I lose, somebody else wins. That's what you got to think. Yeah,
I'm stealing that. Who was it? So I can give him credit once.
It was Wayne Fonset who told that to me. Who is retired now. Worked for him 3 times. His last role was running Concur here in Europe. And and talk about somebody who could, if you ever got a compliment off him, you walked on cloud 9 for 3 weeks. You really deserved it. But most of the time, what he just told you was what you needed to hear.
That's bloody brilliant. I love that. I shall definitely be stealing that. Thank you.
In terms of letting the reps fail, I just knew how important it was to have these win rates as high as we could, And there's kind of a bit of an academic arrogance about me, which is, an educated customer buys whatever product I'm selling. So if they don't buy it, it's our fault. And
no bad prospects, only bad salespeople.
Yeah, we're the only reasons why we lose deals. We're either in the wrong deal or we're selling the wrong thing to the wrong person, whatever. But yeah, I'm letting that happen here. And I've got to say it's been a revelation. I'm obviously not letting it happen very often, but it is a rite of passage. Yeah.
So as a result of allowing your reps to fail, what have you learned?
So there's two things. One is you have to do something so all of the failures they've had, we haven't lost the business. If a customer wants to buy from you, they will find a way to do it. Even if the sales rep has completely ballsed it up, done something wrong, whatever. So it actually doesn't affect the bottom line. If anything, exactly the same as in customer service. They'll tell you in customer service, you buy a product and it works, the customer will recommend you 30% of the time. You buy a product and it fails, they'll recommend you 2% of the time. If you buy a product, it fails, and you recover better than they expected you to, they'll actually recommend you 90% of the time. So you should actually design failure into these things. So if you can recover the sales process in a way that exceeds their expectations, you're actually increasing your win rates. Very
good. Very interesting. Okay, let's spend a little bit of time talking about hiring the right managers. What are the qualities that you look for, the predictors of success for a manager to succeed?
I'll share with you some big data stats. So you'll be aware, I used to work for Exactly, which do the sales comp. They have a solution that allows organizations to manage and calculate their sales comp. Because they're doing that for lots of organizations, they've done it for lots of years, they've got some anonymous aggregated data. And so the facts are that the best sales managers, literally by a country mile, this isn't by a feather, are those who had the highest portfolio penetration as a rep, not the people who did the most in revenue. So think about that. So if I have 8 or 9 modules that I can sell a customer, what you typically find is the top reps are really good at selling 1 or 2 of those modules to as many people as they can find, and they smash their number. The best managers went round everybody and sold everybody 8 modules. Now, can you imagine what that manager does when you give them to a bunch of reps who sell 1 or 2 modules to everybody? If they can get them in a small percentage of occasions to sell 4, 5, and 6 modules, the revenue goes off the charts. It also protects you in those quarters where things are, you suddenly a competitor comes in on one of you've now got the skills. They've helped those superb salespeople have a broader portfolio to spread their risk. The second thing that actually comes through loud and clear by a magnitude of 5%, so their reps achieve 5% better against their quotas, is female sales leaders. So if you want high-performing sales teams, then one is you've got to find female sales leaders. The only way you'll find those, by the way, because there's not many of them around in the software industry, we're atrocious at having, I think, something like 34% of sales reps are female in technology, and it's about 17% in software. So if you want female sales leaders, you need to hire them as SDRs and train them up over the years. And then 2 is concentrate and look at developing those reps who have good portfolio penetration.
That's fantastic advice. So tell me, in terms of the day-to-day cadence, the rhythm of being a manager in software and SaaS, what does a good cadence look like for a manager?
Well, as I said, 50% of their time as a first-line manager, they should be coaching. So that means they need to be on calls or reviewing calls. They need to be obviously letting their reps lead, not them. It's really difficult when you're the manager and you're on the call. Even the customer might ask you, Marcus, you're my boss on this call. Marcus, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this. And as a manager, you've just got to have that skill to say, well, you know what? Tom was on a call recently and covered exactly that question. Tom, why don't you share your experience in that area? In other words, you're kind of rewarding and reversing, but giving it back to your rep. So coaching, number 1, Absolutely. You hit on it as well. Hiring and having a pool of talent. Networking. at learning themselves. A lot of managers, it's like that martial arts analogy that, so anybody will tell you once they get to a black belt is when they realize they were starting to learn their martial art. It's when they get through their dans. Up to that point, they were thinking about it. And that takes milliseconds, which loses your edge. So as sales managers, you need to be spending more time training and developing skills because, again, high-performing sales organizations, they've worked out that training their managers is more important than training the reps.
Now, this is really interesting. Only 5% of the global spend on training is for managers. They are
ridiculous.
In the most precarious position of any manager in any business. And a good manager with a team of average reps is likely to outperform a team of superstars with a bad manager because the majority of people leave their manager. They leave their boss, 80%.
Yeah. And you always hear this thing, so coming back to this cross-sell, upsell rep being a better manager than the top rep. Top reps sulk when they go into leadership and they earn less money. The fact is your top reps in a company should be earning more or similar to the CEO of the business.
Absolutely.
Right? If they're not, something's wrong with your comp plan. Making those people managers is a failure of that business.
I agree.
What are you doing? There are many different ways of motivating people other than promoting them into a lower paid position. I've never heard of that being motivating. Now, your cross-sell, upsell reps, chances are they're going to be paid more money and more systematically. It's going to be kind of ironed out as a leader. So, money's taken out of the equation in terms of it being a motivator. But guess what they're able to do? They love that ability to help, advise, educate. One of the diseases in our industry is promoting top reps into sales management.
I don't know if you heard my interview with Tom Shodorf.
I did not. Okay. Shame on me.
I'll send you the link because it is fabulous. Yeah. But Tom made a really interesting point, which is he got into management very late because he wasn't the top rep. He really struggled and tried, and they wouldn't promote him because they said, well, you're not top performer. Now, in my experience, what you get when you promote a top rep is you lose a good rep and you gain a atrocious manager. They're wired differently. They're completely different skill set. And the normal route to management is you're tapped on the shoulder, Tom, you're top rep, congratulations, you're now a manager. And they do what was done to them, which is crazy because the typical route that top rep manages to perform at their peak is in spite of rather than because of their managers.
Yeah.
We did some research at the Sandler Research Center last year, and the output was that only 6%, that's 6%, of managers are qualified for the job.
Wow.
Now, that's a bloody terrifying statistic. What we also found was only 13% of teams worldwide hit their quota. 44% of individual reps, but only 13% of teams. Now, those teams, in all probability, are likely to be run by, to a large extent, good managers or good leaders. And my suspicion is in the COVID crisis, that number will stay relatively constant, but the 44% will drop dramatically because the managers don't know how to coach. They don't know how to recruit well.
And it's not just coaching. I swear the art of forecasting got lost somewhere about 15 years ago. I very rarely see any training around or and not just training on that, but actually people thinking about what is a forecastable deal? Where is it at in the process? How accurate are we? And it's mind-boggling. I swear 60% of most companies' forecast is made up of the stuff that slid over from the previous quarter.
This then raises another really crucial question. Boards are making decisions, important, critical, strategic decisions, expensive decisions, on the basis of a work of fiction and fabrication. What the hell is going on? Why is it that leadership, particularly in hypergrowth scale-up businesses, are not hot as hell on forecasting accuracy?
Part of me says, they're actually trying to make up a forecast. Can you tell what a jigsaw looks like with 4 pieces? No. The adoption of CRM, the usage of it for tracking activities and kind of those frequencies and what have you, and picking up the level of telemetry that's required to make an informed decision is abhorrent across the board. And, heaven forbid anybody who tries to work out what a jigsaw looks like with 4 pieces. I mean, if it's a 1,000-piece puzzle, I'd at least like 800 pieces in there to be able to make an informed decision. And so where does that rest? There is very few companies have cracked the idea of accountability back down to reps. I remember at Right Now Technologies, just before we were going public, we implemented a plan that addressed this hook, line, and sinker. We did 2 things. Number one was we had a 9-month sales cycle. So we had reps 3 months into a deal call a date. If they hit the date, they got a massive kicker. If they were 1 week either side of it, they got basically the standard commission. Outside of that, they then started to get reduction in commission. I think the worst was a 7% reduction if there were 1 month either side. So suddenly close dates became really accurate because guess what? Reps started asking the question, when do you need this by? What happens if you don't achieve that date? And they actually started doing commercial closes to the date that was communicated, not the quarter end, which is really disarming for prospects because you said to me 17th of May, if you can buy within a week of the 17th of May, you got a 5% discount. Outside of that, I don't care. Well, procurement people were disarmed by that because there's no quarter end. The second thing we did was we were really sick and tired of people sandbagging and or undercalling deals because they didn't want the inspection. So what we started doing was paying on the forecasted or contracted amount, whichever was lower. So if I forecasted a deal for 300K and it closed at 700, I only got paid on 300. If I forecasted it at 700 and it only closed at 300, obviously you only got paid on the 300. But you were going to be inspected like heavily because you put it in a 700K deal. So what we found was suddenly we were getting very accurate close dates and we were getting, very accurate values in the pipeline. We were starting to be able to make informed decisions about hiring 6, 7, 8 months in advance.
Wow, that's brilliant. Okay, so let me ask you this then. Fast growth companies, private equity. Let's talk about the marriage with the devil. How do you manage those relationships effectively so that you're not being driven by private equity's agenda and what you're doing the right thing by the business?
Well, you've got, whether it's VC, whether it's private equity, they're looking for their returns. Tell you so, my driving instructor once told me, she said, I can teach you to pass your test and you might not be a good driver. Mm-hmm. Or I can teach you how to drive and passing your test should just happen. So translate that into business. If you keep aiming for the number they give you, chances are you're not going to be running a great business. You're going to be doing unnatural things, like, for example, discounting the hell out of a deal just to get it in the quarter to make the number, not realizing that you're going to pay for that with every expansion and every renewal forever and ever. Amen. You haven't just cost the company 30 grand. You've probably cost them best part of $1 million because you've just taken the value out of that deal for the future. Oh, and by the way, you've now also set the price for the market because they'll talk to people now. The number of Slack groups I'm on where people are saying, I'm paying this for this product. What's everybody else paying? And it's you've got to realize there is a knock-on impact of doing a crappy deal. So the other thing I would say is, before you work with these organizations is understand what is my, simplify, what is my core ICP? What is my market? As you were saying before, ideal customer profile. Simplify and exploit. As you were saying before when you're doing your comedy thing, if you could get rid of 50%, which 50% would you get rid of? Of all the prospects in your current target market at the moment, if you could get rid of 50%, which would they be? Right? If you could get rid of another 25%, which would they be? Yeah. And then another 50%. You can keep going. Now I've got a bunch of people I can go and sell to. Chances are I'm not going to have that conversation I had with Wayne then, which is, come back to me when you're working for me more than you're working for the competition. Make sure that you're getting a fair price for your solution. The number of startups I speak to where, how did you arrive at this price? Well, if we sell at this, we get 70% gross margin. Right. Okay. So you do realize that the people you're selling to, I remember the CFO of HSBC's IT department. Yeah, so they spend billions on IT a year in OpEx. And you want to go and sell to the CFO of that business unit? How much? If you've got a 100K solution, you're not going to get a meeting with them because they can't have enough 100K meetings a year to spend $6.5 billion. You've got to have a $2 billion solution for them to even spend the time. Otherwise, they're delegating it. I remember I'd share one story with you. One of the reps who used to work for me, Noel, who's like way better rep than ever I was. We were selling to a large photocopier manufacturer, and the global head of HR was involved. And she said to us, she said, 2 million quid. It's like, 2 million quid, that's my limit. I was thinking, this is brilliant. We're like, double list price. We're like 700K. We're going to do like the deal that's going to be the deal of the year. No, you're going to get paid a fortune in commission. And just as I was about to lean in to respond, Noel said, what do you mean? 2 million's your limit. She said, well, if it's below 2 million, it's delegated authority and I can't sign it off. I need this to be above 2 million so that, I can have my name on it. It's not their money, it's their ass on the line. And one big lesson for me that was, I was like, wow. So guess what our phone call was after that? It was, phoning up an Accenture and saying, right, now how can you pad this deal out to make it, over 2 million? They were like, with a short breath, was it's a piece of cake. We'll just have, 20, parallel teams rolling this out globally. We can easily get this to like $3.5 million as a total package. I was like, brilliant. She was happy as Larry.
I have a very similar story. One of our clients was selling against SAP in Germany to a German company. And they had a competing module to SAP, but they received this invitation to tender and they weren't going to bid because there was no point. It was a 10-year client of SAP. They had everything SAP. They were happy with it. It worked. Anyway, long story short, he wasn't going to bid, but management forced him into it. And this was what the exception that proves the rule. Anyway, he put it all in at list price, 3 million euro. And a week later, a little brown envelope pops on his desk. He opens it, you've won. And he said to the guy, after the CTO, after 6 months, Hans, why did you buy our product? SAP's got an identical module. And he says, well, in about 2 years, I plan to leave this company and I don't have a project with your brand on it. So he spent 3 million euro just so he could improve his CV. What you need to understand is people buy for their reason. I've had 2 people buy because they wanted IVF. And there are 2 sets of twins out there that came about as a result of the sales that they made through the trading they did with me. Never crossed my mind. And another guy, he had an 80 grand vet's bill for his horse Jacob, and he couldn't afford it. So he paid me 20 grand, and then he was able to afford the fees for the vet. Crazy stuff. So I know there's one thing that really pisses you off, which is over-assignment of quota. Let's talk about that. I can sit back.
You could sit back for the next 20 minutes. So I have 2 issues with quota at the moment. One is I don't believe it's relevant in the software as a service industry, period. And we'll unpack that in a second.
Yeah.
And then 2 is I cannot understand why a company thinks it's right or appropriate to divide the corporate number by the number of reps and add on 20%, and that becomes the quota. It has no relevance to what is the potential of a particular patch territory. You've got time, territory, talent, and target. Am I in the company at the right time? What territory do I have? What potential is in the territory in a given year, of course, because that's when talent, am I able to actually, am I the right salesperson for that company? I've seen, there are great salespeople who will fail in companies just because they're the wrong kind of salesperson for that company. And then target, is my target appropriate? Most companies peanut butter spread their targets. By the way, if you just want to improve overall performance, customize targets. If you've got flat territories, you get a 4.3% improvement in quota attainment. So my point is quota is attached to a comp plan. It's therefore a motivational technique. And if you say, well, okay, in this day and age, I remember you and I a while ago were talking about it. I said, 100% is not enough anymore. If you're not doing 200%, you're not good enough. So why don't you give somebody a quota that's half what you want them to do with a view to them getting to 200%, and then alter the mechanics of the plan so that when they get to 200%, you're paying them exactly the same as what you would have paid them when they got to 100%. You're just altering the percentages around. Now, halfway through the year, I'm at my number. I'm feeling good. My CV's looking great because I've done my number, and I'm into my accelerators. Just a quota is a motivational tool. It's not the number of reps divided into the corporate number.
I think it also has another knock-on effect, which is the board and the investors are happy, but you end up with a really pissed-off sales force, and they're the ones who are getting you there. Why would you deliberately demotivate your salespeople?
Well, the over-assignment stuff is great. I mean, some people over-assign a ridiculous amount, which is, where, every rep is on a pip, and yet the CFO and the CEO are having a merry dance in their office because they smashed their number. It's like, that level of over-assignment, again, is also wrong. I do like the metrics. Pete Crosby always talks about, you take the OT of a rep, and if you can times it by 4 or 5, that should be the revenue that you're looking for them to get. If you are doing quotas, if you're in the industry of not doing land and expand. But if you're in land and expand, get rid of quotas altogether. Just go for a gross margin model.
Well, this again raises another question. Obviously, I'm very passionate about channel, having spent a lot of time working there, written the book. But what I tend to see is that new business is the golden child.
Yeah.
And account management is the sort of sleepy, slightly dopey kid. And the channel is the gingerhead, bastard, ugly stepdaughter of direct sales. And that seems to me completely arse about face, because it costs up to 15 times more now to sell to a new customer than it does to an existing. And so many organizations that are in hypergrowth, particularly where they're backed by investors, they're on a land grab and they're not trying to build a profitable business. What are your thoughts about building a hypergrowth business that is actually profitable and sustainable?
Well, so hypergrowth is typically, it's logo acquisition. I'm with you on this, Marcus. The channel, if you've got a solution that is not an expert educational sell, isn't so off the wall that, you need to spend months training people to be able to do it, then you've got to look at the channel because it gives you feet on the street and gives you coverage. You get the logos in. Profitability comes, for me, from account management, from that post-sale. If you think about it, how many SaaS companies know how long the average tenure of a customer is? Because you'll have this age-old scenario. The first year that you sell somebody to somebody, you have a dramatic impact on their business. The second year, as they start to mature in their usage of it, you still have a good third year. We're now basically a cost because we've become status quo. The business runs like this. Actually, we're looking to reduce costs. We'll take this out. Now, 12 months later, they might be back at square one and they need to buy the solution again. Profitability for me comes from one, upsells, cross-sells. And the reason for that as an input is what you typically find is your relationship extends with the customer. If you're a SaaS company and you can move from a 2.9-year relationship to a 5.4-year relationship, what's your profitability going to do? It's going to go through the roof.
Absolutely.
Profitability doesn't come from acquisition. It comes from retention.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we're hitting the top of the hour. This has been incredibly insightful, and I can't thank you enough. I've learned a lot.
It's a pleasure.
Tell me something. What are you being influenced by, listening to, reading, watching, or even what was that group that you said?
The Revenue Collective.
Revenue Collective. So who or what are you being influenced by?
Yeah, so I am, I learn probably more from my SDRs than I do from anywhere else, because we learn to be stupid, I think, as we get older in the career. We just keep going back to what worked previously, and the world keeps changing really quickly, and now more so than ever. And if you actually spend time, they come up with some just absolute genius moves. And our skill as management is to make sure that everybody else copies that afterwards. I am also, the Revenue Collective, we have a bunch of, people who are earlier on in their careers who are in sales leadership. They keep looking to us more for reassurance, I think, rather than ideas. People who are a little bit longer in the tooth. But again, I'm just learning a ton off them, how they think about business, how they hire, what they're looking for, ideas around proposition and selling. So, yeah, a ton in that area. Personally, myself, I'm trying to change my language to away messaging rather than towards messaging. Tend to find I work for companies where I'm really passionate about their products or service. I was a customer of Outreach before I joined, so I know everything that it can do, and I keep telling everybody what it can do. But of course, only 10% of people buy on towards. It's like vitamins and aspirins. You wouldn't have a headache if you took vitamins. Shut up! I've got a headache. I want some aspirin. If you can take the pain away, it's always more powerful than preventing a pain. So, constantly working on myself on that away messaging, but also coaching my teams on it as well.
Excellent. Okay, so a bit of negative reverse refresher training would help.
There you go. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, if you had a golden ticket and you could go back and advise that idiot 23-year-old Tom who thought he knew it all, was invincible and would live forever, what advice would you give him to avoid a lifetime of idiocy and self-sabotage?
I actually have very few regrets with regards to my career. Behind me, I've got a few trophies, so I feel like I kind of did pretty well. If I was to hone off the edges, not to try, it takes twice as long to lose a deal than it does to win one. And I was really good at, I was so cocky that I would disqualify early, that the knock-on effect of that was everyone that I kept in, I should play through to completion. And a good poker player will tell you, even if you're pretty well all in on a hand, it's better to come out and to still have some chips on the table than just to send yourself bankrupt on one bet. So it's not just disqualify early, but still never be attached to a deal.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. What are you struggling with personally at the moment?
Well, I kind of shared before was the away messaging. The second area would be, I don't know how, it's an unconscious competence. I use a lot of analogies. People call me Tom Analogy, and I also enjoy the skill of storytelling. And so I'm good at helping customers envisage a future through storytelling. What I'm struggling with is how to break that down into building blocks for my reps and to make them great storytellers.
Very interesting. There is a structure that I use for a lot of my videos now called Doom and Bloom. So it starts with a framework where we introduce the idea, and then we talk about the kind of problems that people have, and then we dispel the myth. What you're doing is you're taking them through a process of discovery that come with a bunch of preconceptions. And then you help them smash those preconceptions. And when you do that, then you take them through common assumptions, you crumble that moment, then you introduce them to a truth, and then you verify that truth with evidence. And then you ask for agreement or some form of action that they take. And then there's an acronym, EASY, where you start to talk about either experience, activity, scene, or you sharing your story. And then you leave them with some simple takeaway and a call to action. And that seems to work really well. And there's obviously the hero's journey as well. Very powerful. For those of you who are not familiar with the hero's journey, it's basically problem, protagonist, hits a low ebb, meets a guide. So, it's classic Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. Then they go through a series of ups and downs, and then they manage to come out of it better, having learned something. So
Little Red Riding Hood was always my example. Everybody knows the story, yeah.
Have you ever read a book called Squirrel Inc.?
I have not. Being wildly dyslexic, books are my nemesis, but I do work my way through them.
I'm not sure whether or not it's on audio, but if it is, I'll send you a link to it. But Squirrel Inc. is a wonderful parable. And it's about how a nut-gathering company made up of squirrels deals with all of their leadership communication. I think 7 different story types.
Brilliant.
It's a wonderful read. Tom, I can't even begin to thank you enough. This has been fabulous. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
As have I.
And I hope we can do this again, actually, if you're up for it.
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. Okay. How can people get hold of you?
Via LinkedIn. I'm very accessible on, Tom Castley on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way of doing it.
Are you the most famous Tom Castley in the world?
There's not many of them around, fortunately. Probably don't want many more.
Excellent. Tom, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcus.
This is Marcus Kauke signing off from the Inquisitor podcast. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please take notes. I will be producing a transcript. If you want that, then please get in touch with me via LinkedIn. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, or there's someone you think that I would really be able to interview, then please get in touch with their details. Maybe connect us on LinkedIn. So, Tom, thank you again. This is Marcus Kauke signing off from the Scale Up and Hypergrowth podcast, wishing you all a great week and happy selling. Bye-bye.